Welcome to Drift Away Stories. I'm here to take you on a peaceful journey through time and adventure, where you become the hero of history's greatest moments. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let your mind drift away as we explore worlds beyond your imagination. If these stories help you find rest and escape, consider subscribing for more adventures, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin your journey. The morning mist hangs over the scarred landscape of the Western Front, like the breath of ghosts, swirling through the maze of barbed wire and shell craters that stretch endlessly toward the German lines. You crouch in the muddy confines of a British trench near Passchendaele, your steel helmet heavy on your head, and your Lee Enfield rifle clutched in hands that have not stopped trembling since yesterday's bombardment. The year is 1917, and you are Private William Thompson, 20 years old, a former shop clerk from Manchester who enlisted with enthusiasm that now seems impossibly naive, given what you have witnessed during your 8 months on the Western Front. The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas of 1914 has ground on for 3.5 years, transforming the green fields of Belgium and France into a moonscape of mud, craters, and death that defies everything you thought you knew about civilized warfare. The romantic notions of glory and heroism that filled recruiting posters back home have been replaced by the grim reality of industrial-scale killing, where men die by the thousands for gains measured in yards rather than miles. Your section of trench, designated Fire Bay 7 by the military bureaucracy that attempts to impose order on chaos, houses 12 men from various backgrounds who have been forged into a unit by shared hardship and the constant presence of death. There is Sergeant Davies, a Welsh coal miner whose steady nerves and practical wisdom have kept most of you alive through countless bombardments and raids. Corporal Henderson, a Scottish schoolteacher whose education makes him valuable for reading maps and writing letters for illiterate comrades. Private Mackenzie, a Canadian lumberjack whose enormous strength proves invaluable for carrying wounded men and repairing damaged fortifications. The trench itself represents 3 years of continuous construction and modification, a complex system of dugouts, communication trenches, and defensive positions that has become an underground city stretching along hundreds of miles of front. The walls are reinforced with sandbags, timber, and corrugated iron salvaged from destroyed buildings, creating a labyrinth that provides protection from enemy fire while serving as home, fortress, and tomb for the men who defend this particular section of the line. Your sleeping area consists of a shallow dugout carved into the trench wall, barely large enough for your body and the few personal possessions that connect you to the world beyond this nightmare. A photograph of your family back in Manchester, their faces already seeming like strangers from another life. A letter from your sweetheart Mary, its edges worn soft from repeated reading, promising to wait for your return, though her words feel increasingly distant and unreal. A small Bible given to you by your mother, its pages stained with mud and worse, offering comfort that becomes harder to find with each passing day. The routine of trench life has become as familiar as breathing, though it never loses its underlying tension and danger. Stand to at dawn, when every man takes position with weapons ready in case the enemy attempts a surprise attack during the vulnerable transition from darkness to daylight. Equipment inspection and maintenance, cleaning rifles that must function perfectly despite the omnipresent mud and moisture that corrodes everything in this environment. Meals of tinned beef, hard biscuits, and tea that tastes of metal and chemicals, but provides essential warmth and calories. But underlying every mundane activity is the constant awareness that death can arrive without warning in a dozen different forms. The sniper's bullet that finds its mark despite the most careful precautions. The artillery shell that explodes with devastating randomness, obliterating men and fortifications with equal indifference. The gas attack that turns the air itself into a weapon, forcing desperate scrambles for protective masks that may or may not provide adequate protection against invisible death. This particular morning brings news that fills every man in the trench with dread disguised as grim determination. Brigade headquarters has issued orders for an assault on German positions scheduled for tomorrow at dawn, another attempt to break through enemy lines that have remained essentially static for months. The preliminary bombardment has already begun, with British artillery pounding German trenches in preparation for the infantry attack that will follow. The sound is constant thunder that shakes the earth beneath your feet and makes conversation difficult, even when shouting. Sergeant Davies gathers your section around a crude map sketched on a piece of cardboard, his weathered face serious as he explains the operation that will either advance your lines or add your names to the lengthening casualty lists. Jerry's got 3 lines of trenches about 200 yards apart, he explains, his Welsh accent thick with tension. The artillery's supposed to cut the wire and knock out their machine guns, but we all know how reliable that's been in the past. The bitter truth behind his words reflects the harsh lessons learned through previous offensives, where promises of easy victory have been shattered by the reality of German defensive capabilities. The enemy's machine gun nests, constructed with typical German thoroughness, have survived countless bombardments to emerge deadly and effective when attacking infantry reached their positions. The barbed wire that was supposed to be destroyed by artillery fire has often remained intact, channeling attacking troops into killing zones where defensive fire can achieve maximum effectiveness. Your role in tomorrow's attack has been carefully planned by staff officers whose understanding of frontline conditions seems limited by their distance from actual combat. Your section will advance in the second wave, following the initial assault troops who are supposed to break through German defenses and establish footholds that subsequent waves can exploit. The plan sounds logical when explained in the safety of the command post, but experience has taught you that battlefield reality rarely conforms to theoretical expectations. The preparation for battle involves checking and rechecking equipment that your life will depend on during the chaos of combat. Your rifle must be clean and properly zeroed, its bayonet sharp enough to penetrate thick German uniforms and equipment. Your gas mask must be immediately accessible and in perfect working condition, since chemical attacks have become routine elements of trench warfare. Extra ammunition, medical supplies, and emergency rations must be distributed efficiently among the men to ensure availability when normal supply lines are disrupted by combat. But perhaps most important is the psychological preparation required to face the moral and physical challenges of attacking well-prepared enemy positions. The knowledge that you will soon be required to charge across open ground toward men whose only goal is killing you and your comrades creates anxiety that wars with the duty and loyalty that bind your unit together. Sleep becomes impossible despite exhaustion, while thoughts turn inevitably toward home and the people whose photographs provide fragile connections to life beyond the trenches. The evening brings a brief respite from bombardment as both sides observe the unofficial truce that allows wounded men to be evacuated and essential maintenance to be performed on damaged fortifications. The relative quiet seems almost unnatural after hours of constant explosions, but it also provides opportunity for conversations that might be the last between men who have shared months of hardship and danger. Private Johnson, a young farm worker from Yorkshire whose optimism has somehow survived 8 months of trench warfare, attempts to maintain morale with jokes and stories that seem forced but provide necessary distraction from tomorrow's uncertainty. After we break through Jerry's lines, he announces with artificial confidence, I'm going to find myself a nice French cafe and order the biggest meal they can cook. Real food, not this tinned rubbish we've been eating for months. His words generate weak smiles from men who understand the need for hope, but have seen too many friends disappear during previous attacks to believe strongly in their own survival. The statistics are sobering. Casualty rates for infantry assaults often exceed 50%, and survival frequently depends more on luck than skill or courage. Yet the bonds forged through shared danger create obligations that transcend individual self-preservation, making it impossible to abandon comrades even when doing so might improve personal chances of survival. Corporal Henderson uses the quiet evening hours to help several men write letters home, his education making him valuable for expressing thoughts and feelings that exceed the literary skills of soldiers whose formal schooling ended early. The content of these letters follows predictable patterns, reassurances about health and safety that everyone knows are probably false, expressions of love and longing for family members who seem to exist in another world, requests for news about home that might provide anchors to sanity in an insane environment. Your own letter to Mary proves more difficult to write than you anticipated, requiring careful balance between honesty about your situation and the censorship requirements that prohibit detailed information about military operations. The words feel inadequate to express both your love for her and your growing certainty that this war has changed you in ways that may make it impossible to return to the life you shared before enlisting. The naive young man who promised to write regularly and return quickly seems like a stranger whose optimism was based on ignorance rather than understanding. The night passes slowly, despite exhaustion that should guarantee sleep, with men taking turns at sentry duty while others attempt rest that proves elusive given tomorrow's uncertainties. The darkness brings its own dangers as German patrols probe for weaknesses in British defences, while snipers wait patiently for any movement that might provide targets. Every sound requires careful evaluation. The rustle of rats moving through the trenches, the distant crack of rifle fire, the splash of someone moving through puddles that never completely drain from the waterlogged ground. Your turn at sentry duty provides time for reflection on the journey that brought you from a comfortable shop clerk position in Manchester to a muddy hole in the ground where violent death represents the most likely future. The patriotic fervour that drove your enlistment seems impossibly distant now, replaced by understanding that individual survival depends on luck, unit cohesion, and the competence of men whose backgrounds would never have brought them into contact under normal circumstances. The German lines, barely visible through the darkness and morning mist, seem close enough to touch, yet represent a distance that might as well be measured in light years, given the firepower concentrated in the space between opposing trenches. No man's land stretches for perhaps 200 yards, but it contains enough obstacles and defensive positions to stop armies, as previous attacks have demonstrated with tragic regularity. The ground itself bears witness to failed offensives, shell craters filled with stagnant water, tangles of rusted barbed wire, and the scattered remains of men whose attacks ended in death rather than victory. Dawn arrives with the inevitable return of artillery bombardment as British guns resume their attempts to destroy German defences before the infantry assault begins. The intensity exceeds anything you have previously experienced, suggesting that this attack represents a major effort rather than a limited operation designed to improve local positions. The sound becomes a physical presence that seems to penetrate every part of your body, making thought difficult and normal conversation impossible. Sergeant Davies moves through the trench checking equipment and providing final instructions, his calm demeanour helping to control the fear that threatens to overwhelm men facing their first major assault. His experience includes previous battles where similar preparations preceded attacks that achieved tactical success despite horrific casualties, providing some basis for hope that training and determination might overcome German defensive advantages. "Remember your training," he shouts over the artillery noise, his words barely audible despite being delivered at maximum volume. "Stay low, watch for wire, and keep moving forward no matter what happens. The man next to you is depending on you, just like you're depending on him. We've been through worse than this and come out the other side." His words reflect the military wisdom that emphasizes unit cohesion and forward momentum as keys to success in infantry assaults, but they also acknowledge the reality that individual survival often depends on factors beyond personal control. The randomness of artillery fire, the accuracy of enemy machine gunners, the effectiveness of defensive preparations, all of these variables will determine who lives and who dies during the next few hours. The final minutes before the assault pass with agonizing slowness as every man contemplates what lies ahead while trying to maintain the psychological composure necessary for effective combat. Equipment is checked one final time, weapons are loaded, and safety catches released. Personal effects are secured against loss during the violence to come. Some men pray quietly, while others engage in nervous conversation that provides distraction from mounting tension. The whistle that signals the beginning of the attack cuts through the artillery noise like a knife, its shrill note transforming months of preparation and training into immediate action that will determine your fate and that of every man in your unit. The moment you have been dreading and anticipating in equal measure has finally arrived, bringing with it the ultimate test of courage, training, and luck that will separate the living from the dead. As you climb out of the trench and begin moving across no man's land toward the German positions that bristle with defensive firepower, time seems to slow and accelerate simultaneously. Every step forward brings you closer to enemy lines where machine guns wait to harvest attackers, while every second that passes without being hit feels like a minor miracle that cannot possibly continue. The training that has been drilled into you for months takes over, suppressing conscious thought in favor of automatic responses that might keep you alive long enough to reach your objective. The first steps into no man's land bring a shocking transition from the relative safety of the trench to the exposed horror of the battlefield, where German machine guns immediately begin their deadly harvest of advancing British troops. The sound of bullets whining overhead mixes with the screams of wounded men and the continuing crash of artillery shells, creating a symphony of violence that overwhelms your senses while demanding split-second decisions that determine life or death. Your training takes over as conscious thought becomes impossible in the chaos of combat, muscle memory guiding you through the techniques drilled into you during months of preparation for this moment. Stay low, but keep moving forward. Watch for muzzle flashes that indicate machine gun positions. Use shell craters for temporary cover while advancing toward the enemy trenches. Help wounded comrades when possible, but don't stop for anything that might compromise the attack's momentum. The ground beneath your feet tells the story of previous failed assaults, churned earth mixed with fragments of equipment, clothing, and worse. Shell craters filled with stagnant water force, constant detours that disrupt the carefully planned attack formation, while tangles of barbed wire that survived the preliminary bombardment channel, advancing troops into killing zones where German defensive fire achieves maximum effectiveness. The romantic image of soldiers charging bravely toward enemy positions gives way to the reality of men crawling desperately through mud while machine guns methodically cut down anyone who presents a clear target. Sergeant Davies appears beside you in a shell crater, his face streaked with mud and blood from a minor shrapnel wound that he ignores while shouting orders barely audible over the din of battle. "The wire's not cut properly up ahead," he yells, pointing toward a section where German defenses remain intact despite hours of bombardment. "We'll have to work around to the left, where Henderson found a gap. Stay close and keep your head down." The reality that your preliminary bombardment has failed to achieve its objectives becomes apparent as you observe the German trenches ahead. Instead of the devastated positions described in pre-attack briefings, you see well-constructed fortifications that have survived the artillery barrage sufficiently to maintain defensive capabilities. Machine gun nests, concealed beneath layers of protective material, emerge unscathed to engage attacking British forces, while carefully positioned riflemen pick off individual targets with methodical precision. The advance continues despite mounting casualties, driven by the momentum of men who understand that retreat across open ground offers even less chance of survival than pressing forward toward objectives that seem increasingly impossible to reach. Bodies of soldiers from the first wave mark the path of the attack, some motionless, and others crying out for help that cannot be provided while the battle continues. The moral weight of leaving wounded comrades behind wars with tactical necessity, creating psychological burdens that will haunt survivors long after the immediate fighting ends. Private Johnson, the optimistic Yorkshire farm boy who talked about French cafes just hours earlier, falls victim to a sniper's bullet that finds its mark despite his careful movement between shell craters. His death occurs without drama or final words, simply a young man who stops moving and becomes another casualty in an attack that has already consumed hundreds of lives for gains measured in yards. The randomness of his fate, stepping into the wrong position at exactly the wrong moment, emphasizes how little individual skill or courage matters when facing the industrial efficiency of modern warfare. Your section's advance brings you to within 50 yards of the German front line, closer than any previous assault has achieved in this sector. But the final approach requires crossing open ground, swept by machine gun fire that has already claimed most of the first wave attackers. The tactical situation demands either retreat or a desperate rush that might succeed through speed and surprise, but will almost certainly result in heavy casualties regardless of the outcome. Corporal Henderson, using hand signals to avoid revealing positions to enemy observers, indicates a shell crater that might provide cover for a flanking movement around the strongest German defensive position. His plan requires splitting your already depleted section into even smaller groups, but it offers the only realistic chance of reaching the enemy trenches without being wiped out entirely. The decision to attempt such a maneuver reflects both the desperation of your tactical situation and the leadership skills that have kept Henderson alive through months of similar crises. The flanking movement succeeds partially due to tactical surprise and partially due to the confusion that characterizes all infantry combat, where small groups of determined men can sometimes achieve objectives that larger formations cannot accomplish through direct assault. Your approach to the German trench from an unexpected angle allows you to engage enemy defenders who are focused on repelling the main attack, creating opportunities that would not exist under normal circumstances. The hand-to-hand combat that follows your entry into the German trench brings a primitive savagery that contrasts sharply with the technological sophistication of modern warfare. Bayonets, rifle butts, and improvised weapons become tools for close-quarters fighting that reduces warfare to its most basic elements. Individual men struggling for survival in confined spaces where victory goes to whoever proves more determined and ruthless. The training that emphasized marksmanship and unit tactics becomes irrelevant in favor of physical strength and willingness to inflict violence at intimate range. Your first direct encounter with a German soldier reveals the humanity of your supposed enemies, as the young man facing you across a narrow section of trench appears as frightened and desperate as you feel. His uniform is muddy and torn, his equipment shows signs of long use under difficult conditions, and his eyes reflect the same mixture of fear and determination that drives your own actions. The moment of recognition that passes between you emphasizes how artificial the hatreds that fuel this war truly are, even as tactical necessity demands that one of you must die. The outcome of your individual struggle depends more on luck and positioning than superior skill or courage, as a stumble over debris in the trench bottom brings you within range of his bayonet thrust, while simultaneously giving you the angle needed for a counterattack that proves decisive. His death brings no satisfaction, only relief at your own survival and immediate concern about the next threat that might emerge from the maze of trenches and dugouts that comprise the German defensive system. The capture of approximately 50 yards of German trench represents a tactical success that comes at enormous cost in British casualties, with your original section of 12 men reduced to 4 effective fighters plus several wounded who require immediate medical attention. The ground gained provides little strategic advantage, as German reserve positions quickly organize counterattacks designed to recapture lost territory before British forces can consolidate their gains. Sergeant Davies, wounded but still functional, organizes the defense of your newly captured positions, while runners attempt to establish communication with British forces in the rear. The consolidation work requires constant vigilance against German counterattacks, while simultaneously preparing defensive positions that can withstand the artillery bombardment that inevitably follows any change in frontline positions. The German response proves swift and well coordinated, demonstrating the tactical competence that has allowed their forces to maintain defensive superiority despite being outnumbered and increasingly short of essential supplies. Counterattacking infantry supported by accurate artillery fire quickly isolates your small foothold from the main British lines, creating a dangerous situation where retreat becomes as hazardous as continued advance. The remainder of the day passes in a series of desperate defensive actions as German forces attempt to eliminate the British penetration of their line. Each attack brings its own crisis that requires improvised solutions using whatever weapons, ammunition, and personnel remain available. The systematic training that prepared you for conventional infantry tactics proves inadequate for the fluid situation where survival depends on adaptability and resourcefulness rather than adherence to established procedures. Private Mackenzie, the Canadian lumberjack, whose strength has been invaluable throughout your time in the trenches, falls victim to a German grenade that explodes with devastating effect in the confined space of the captured trench. His loss eliminates not just a capable fighter, but also the psychological anchor that his steady presence provided during the most dangerous moments of the battle. The progressive reduction of your unit through casualties creates isolation that makes each remaining man more valuable, while simultaneously increasing the pressure on survivors to maintain effective resistance. The arrival of British reinforcements late in the afternoon provides temporary relief from the immediate threat of being overrun, but it also brings orders to continue the attack towards secondary objectives that seem even more heavily defended than the positions you have already captured at such great cost. The disconnect between rear area planning and frontline reality becomes apparent as staff officers who have not witnessed the carnage demand continued advances that will inevitably result in additional casualties for minimal gains. Corporal Henderson's response to these orders reflects the practical wisdom that has kept him alive through multiple battles and earned the respect of men whose lives depend on his decisions. "We'll advance as ordered," he tells the messenger from brigade headquarters, "but we'll do it our way and at our pace. These men have already done more than anyone has a right to ask, and I won't waste their lives on impossible objectives." The renewed attack proceeds with the cautious professionalism of men who understand both their military obligations and the tactical realities that determine success or failure in trench warfare. Instead of the headlong charge that characterized the morning assault, the afternoon advance uses careful reconnaissance and coordinated small unit tactics that maximize the chances of achieving objectives while minimizing unnecessary casualties. Your role in this phase of the battle involves providing covering fire for advancing troops while maintaining security for the positions already captured. The responsibility requires constant alertness and accurate shooting, as German defensive positions continue to threaten any movement that exposes British forces to enemy observation. The precision demanded by this work provides contrast to the chaotic violence of the morning's assault, demonstrating how rapidly battlefield conditions can change and how different skills become critical at various stages of combat. The secondary objectives prove as difficult to capture as Henderson predicted, with German defensive preparations that have survived the day's fighting largely intact. The limited gains achieved during the afternoon advance come at additional cost in casualties that further depletes the already reduced strength of attacking units. By evening, it becomes clear that the day's offensive has reached the limit of what can be accomplished given available resources and the strength of enemy resistance. The consolidation of captured positions brings its own challenges, as British forces attempt to incorporate their modest gains into a defensive system that can withstand German counterattacks during the vulnerable hours of darkness. The work requires constant vigilance against enemy infiltration, while simultaneously improving fortifications that might need to withstand artillery bombardment and infantry assault for days or weeks to come. Your assignment to a listening post in no man's land provides intimate exposure to the aftermath of the day's fighting, as the darkness reveals the full extent of casualties suffered by both sides during the assault. The ground between opposing trenches is littered with wounded men whose cries for help create moral dilemmas that have no good solutions. Helping them exposes rescuers to enemy fire, but ignoring their suffering violates basic human decency. The unofficial truce that develops during the night allows both sides to evacuate their wounded and recover equipment that might be useful for future operations. This brief respite from hostilities provides opportunities for reflection on the day's events and their significance within the larger context of a war that shows no signs of ending despite years of devastating battles. Your survival of the day's fighting brings complex emotions that resist easy categorization. Relief at being alive combines with grief for fallen comrades. Pride in accomplishing difficult objectives mixes with horror at the violence you have witnessed and participated in. The transformation from shop clerk to combat veteran has accelerated during this single day of intense fighting, creating psychological changes that will influence your understanding of yourself and the world for the rest of your life. The letters you write home during the quiet hours after midnight require careful consideration of how to describe experiences that exceed anything your family and friends could possibly understand. The reality of trench warfare, its combination of boredom and terror, brotherhood and violence, heroism and futility, defies easy explanation to people whose lives continue in the peaceful routine of civilian existence. Sergeant Davies, despite his wounds and exhaustion, maintains the steady leadership that has become essential for unit morale and effectiveness. His assessment of the day's fighting emphasizes both the tactical successes achieved and the lessons learned that might improve future operations. "We did what we were asked to do," he explains to the assembled survivors of your section. "Jerry's tougher than headquarters thinks, but he's not invincible. We proved that today, and we'll prove it again when the time comes." His words provide the professional perspective that helps transform the day's chaos into meaningful military experience, but they cannot eliminate the personal cost of combat measured in friends killed and wounded, innocents lost, and psychological burdens that will accompany survivors long after the war ends. The price of victory, even limited tactical success like today's advance, proves higher than anyone anticipated when the offensive was planned in the safety of rear area headquarters. The dawn brings renewed artillery bombardment as German forces attempt to eliminate the British penetration of their defensive line, but it also brings the satisfaction of having survived your first major battle and proven yourself capable of functioning effectively under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The shop clerk from Manchester, who entered the trenches months ago, has been transformed into a combat veteran whose skills and judgment are valued by men whose lives depend on competent leadership and reliable performance. As you clean your rifle and prepare for another day of warfare, you reflect on the journey that brought you from the comfortable predictability of civilian life to the harsh realities of the Western Front. The romantic notions of military service that influenced your decision to enlist have been replaced by understanding of warfare as a deadly profession that demands constant learning and adaptation for those who hope to survive its challenges. The future stretches ahead with uncertainty that makes planning beyond the immediate tactical situation seem futile, but it also offers opportunities to develop skills and relationships that provide meaning despite the surrounding destruction. The brotherhood forged through shared danger creates bonds that transcend the normal social barriers between men of different backgrounds, while the technical challenges of combat provide opportunities for growth and achievement that would be impossible in civilian occupations. Your transformation from civilian to soldier is complete, but your education in the realities of modern warfare has only begun. Each day on the Western Front will bring new challenges that test your courage, judgment, and ability to function as part of a military unit whose effectiveness determines not just mission success, but the survival of every man in your section. The war that was supposed to end quickly has become a way of life that demands constant adaptation to circumstances that change with deadly unpredictability.